How does a small country of 5 million people go from being a failed economy to now having the most cars produced on a per capita basis? To really understand how big of an economic success story Slovakia is, we must consider that just over 3 decades ago, Czechoslovakia was under the Soviet Union's influence and the country's economy was significantly lower compared to its western neighbors. The country was suffering from both economical and political crises, but now in 2024, Slovakia produced more cars than countries like United Kingdom, Italy, Poland and even Romania. And while there are still some challenges to Slovakia's economy, we must still appreciate the achievement of such level. To really understand how a small country played the chess with its economy and earned the nickname of Tatra Tiger, we must divide the topic in several chapters. Slovakia in Czechoslovakia and its development as a Soviet satellite. Tatra Tiger, how independent Slovakia played economic chess. What are the opportunities and risks associated with Slovakia's economy? To really understand the current situation of Slovakia, we must know what Czechoslovakia was and how it functioned as a country. Historians often divide Czechoslovakia's history in several parts. The first, second and the third Czechoslovakia republics were quite different from each one. The first Czechoslovak Republic was founded in 1918. The country was independent and democratic, and there was big push towards more education, economic development and social progress. The country lasted from 1918 to 1938. At that time, most of the countries had little to no industrial development. For example, Romania, on which we made a video about, had little to no industrial development compared to Czechoslovakia. First, Czechoslovakia was one of the world's 10 most industrialized countries. However, the Nazi Germany attacked Czechoslovakia and the country's economy was heavily destroyed. German occupation of the Czechoslovakia lasted from 1938 to 1945. After that, in 1948, Czechoslovakia became satellite state of the USSR and adopted centrally planned economy. One of the big quirks with Czechoslovakia was that the Czech region was more developed industrially compared to Slovakia. So Soviet Union wanted to balance the development. First 5-year plan heavily targeted industrial development of Slovakia. In this case, more and more heavy industries would open up in Slovakia, while at the same time the government would build all the necessary infrastructure to help the heavy industry sector. While heavy industrial development and infrastructure development did help the Slovakia region, this centrally planned economy was inefficient compared to countries with capitalistic model, like United States, UK and others. Being the satellite state of the USSR, Czechoslovakia was missing out a lot in terms of technological and economic development. In 1938, GDP per capita of Czechoslovakia was similar to countries like Austria, Finland and Italy, but in 1990, the GDP per capita was only a fraction of those countries. However, not everything could be attributed to the inefficiency of the economic model. A lot of growth was lost due to the trade imbalances with the Soviet Union. The Soviet Union had a significant influence on the Eastern Bloc. They could force any of their states to sell their products cheaper. The Czechoslovakia mainly exported to the Union and thus their economy was heavily dependent on it. The Soviet Union had significant control and leverage when it came to favorable trade deals. This has left Czechoslovakia in a cycle of stagnation, where it was forced to make unfavorable trade deals with the USSR, because the Union had a strong grip on the country. For example, in 1968, Czechoslovakia tried reforms that would give citizens more liberties when it came to outside travel, media and freedom of speech. However, the Soviet Union, alongside with Poland, Bulgaria and Hungary, quickly invaded the country and cancelled the reforms. The Soviet Union's economic stagnation started in the late 1970s, but since 1980 this stagnation was becoming more and more obvious. Czechoslovakia's economy was heavily dependent on the Soviet Union, thus Czechoslovakia's economy followed suit. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Czechoslovakia had rise of nationalism and political disagreements. The Slovakia and the Czech regions each had different ideas and wishes to what to do. The political disagreements were high, but the hate between the two regions wasn't as high enough to guarantee civil war. Thus, in 1992, Slovak and Czech leaders agreed to split the country in two. Unfortunately for Slovakia, Czech's economy was more developed compared to Slovakia. GDP per capita in the Czech Republic was about 1.5 times higher than in Slovakia in 1993, and it made a lot of people have doubts about whether or not Slovakia could economically recover, which brings us to chapter 2. So how did the failed Eastern Bloc economy play the economic chess? Well, when Czechoslovakia split into two countries, many people wondered whether or not Slovakia could catch up to its neighbors. At that time, while Slovakia had a relatively strong industrial base compared to other Soviet-aligned countries, it still lagged far behind the Czech Republic in terms of industrial power. Slovakia's economic recovery was far from smooth. After the split, both Slovakia and the Czech Republic traded heavily with post-Soviet countries. However, many of those countries were in economic turmoil, forcing Slovakia to find new trading partners. On top of that, many factories that employed a large part of the population had to shut down because they could not compete with neighboring countries. Slovakia already had a high unemployment rate of 12.15% in 1991, but by 2001 it had risen to 19.15%. In contrast, the Czech Republic's unemployment rate was half that of Slovakia's. Another challenge was the rapid currency split between the two nations, which led to inflation in Slovakia, as its new currency was weaker than the Czech Republic's. However, what set Czechoslovakia apart from most of the other Eastern Bloc countries was how smoothly the split happened. Unlike the Soviet Union, where many countries faced separatist conflicts and civil wars, Slovakia managed to get independence quite freely. By the late 1990s, a major shift occurred. In 1998, Mikuláš Dzurinda was elected as the prime minister, and under his leadership, Slovakia introduced major economic reforms. This included lowering taxes and attracting foreign direct investment, to the point where Slovakia was even called an investor's paradise by rich investors. So to summarize everything, there were a few key factors that helped Slovakia to become the fastest growing economy on the continent and earn the nickname of Tatra Tiger. Slovakia's rapid economic rise was fueled by several key factors. First of all was a strategic location. Slovakia was close to wealthy European markets like Germany, Austria and Poland, while also being near post-Soviet countries like Ukraine and Russia, making it easier to import cheap raw materials like iron ore, coal and oil, while at the same time servicing rich European countries with their needs. On the other hand, a peaceful split also helped a lot. Unlike Moldova, which lost Transnistria in the early 1990s, which damaged its energy production, industrial sector and trade routes, Slovakia's independence did not significantly harm its economy. It is fair to say that Slovakia had one of the smoothest transitions when it came to Soviet bloc countries. And last but not least is proactive reforms and European Union membership. By the late 1990s, Slovakia was already making efforts to attract foreign investors while also working to join the European Union, which it did in 2004. European Union membership opened the door to funding for the industry and the infrastructure modernization, which further accelerated Slovakia's growth. So, with low taxes, a prime geographical location and improving infrastructure, Slovakia became impossible for foreign investors to ignore. Its economic growth between 2002 and 2007 was so rapid that this period was nicknamed as the Tatra Tiger. And while the economic chess was played quite well by Slovakia, there are still some challenges that the country must overcome to ensure the perpetual growth in the future, which brings us to chapter 3. Slovakia is already in a good position in terms of economy, but there are a lot of challenges that the country will face in the future. First and foremost, Slovakia is suffering from a high amount of brain drain and population loss. Just like any other European nation, Slovakia suffers from a low fertility rate. In 2022, Slovakia had 1.57 births per woman on average, compared to replacement level of 2.1. Moreover, Slovakia suffers a lot from brain drain. It is easier for educated citizens to emigrate to Germany or France and get much better salary. Besides that, Slovakia's median age is increasing quite fast. In 2023, the median age of Slovakia's population was at 42.5 years old. This could potentially mess up the demographics and strain several sectors, including healthcare, auto manufacturing, and others. Moreover, Slovakia's economy is extremely dependent on producing and exporting cars. In 2023, almost 1/3 of overall exports was coming from cars. Another 7% came from other car parts and accessories. The over-dependency on this sector could be quite fatal for the country, considering that the European car manufacturers are quickly losing market share in foreign markets, which could make them less competitive and force these shutdowns. For example, China was Volkswagen's biggest foreign market, but recently they lost their share of it. This has led to some terrible results, where Volkswagen had to close down a few factories to make up for the lost revenue. However, I believe that Slovakia is sitting on a geopolitical goldmine because the European Union had recently started push towards reindustrialization of their economy. For example, the European Union is trying to increase defense spending, which could in turn boost local production. Slovakia has enough sufficient infrastructure to catch a big piece of the pie. This is already playing out as we speak. 3 years ago, German defense industry giant Rheinmetall had announced that it wanted to produce new infantry fighting vehicle in Slovakia. In past few months, European Union had been trying to boost their defense spending and military industrial complex, out of which is entirely possible that Slovakia could be one of the few key countries that are suitable for such production. In conclusion, while Slovakia does suffer from brain drain and potential risk of European Union's diminishing car market, it is entirely possible for the country to quickly reposition and fill in the missing industrial capacity for the European Union, which could boost the country's economy quite a lot. Hey, thank you for watching my video. If you have liked the video, please subscribe so you will not miss out on our future uploads.